Oh, that sounds so sweet. So sweet. שלום לכולכם, ברוכים הבאים לקו שלי, לקו היוטיובי שלי. שמי סידני ווינסטון, אני פעיל אתאיסט שנמצא בוונקובר, קנדה. Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Sidney Winston. I am an atheist activist out of Vancouver, Canada. It's been a while since I did this this kind of live streaming. I've been so like caught up in that series that I've been working on spreading the History in the Bible podcast. So I've kind of been doing that, and of course been out of touch with everybody that's in chats and stuff. So here I am. Hello, David. I am watching the chats tonight, as you can see. There we go. Watching those chats. I came across this quite a while ago. I came across this channel, this MythVision podcast channel run by Derek Lambert, and he's got some great stuff on there. He himself is extremely astute and insightful. Plus, he has great guests. I'm going to try and get through one of his guests, one of his podcasts with the guest Dr. Robert Price, and they talk about where did Paul learn about Jesus? Because there is one thing we do know about Paul, and that is that he never met Jesus, right? So Paul never met Jesus, which is kind of weird because they were contemporaries. They were pretty much the same age. What is even more strange is that Paul apparently met Jesus' brother, one of Jesus' brothers, or two of Jesus' brothers, or who knows what. But the fact that he never met Jesus kind of makes me wonder if Jesus ever actually existed. In fact, I'm pretty convinced at this point, from everything that I've absorbed and listened to and read and contemplated and mulled over and processed, that Jesus did not exist. The one overwhelming proof to me is the fact that this Paul guy, the earliest of all the known contemporaries, he did not write one word about Jesus existing. Not one word about Jesus existing. Jesus to him was always this guy in the sky, right? Who he didn't see until some vision, whatever. Hello, Mike. Torres, good morning. So I wanted to hear what Robert Price and Derek. Let me bring them in. There you go. There they are. What they actually are going to talk about. I haven't watched this yet, so I'm expecting good things because both these guys are excellent speakers and riveting to boot. So let's get on with it.
Right, and to me, Paul has obviously a visionary Christ. You pointed out in 1 Corinthians 15.
Hold on a minute. I messed up. I'm going to go back. Here. Sorry. I was messing around with the timing and I didn't set it right. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to try. It's not easy. All right, I'm going to bring it in over here.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Ladies and gentlemen, the sun is shining through my garage door right now. We got natural light coming in, and I have one of the natural lights that has the spark from the beginning, Dr. Robert M. Price, who's joining me today. And we're going to be diving into a bunch of different questions. Of course, whoever wants to send in their questions and things like that. But I figure, why not open up with the title of the video, the thumbnail? You know, where did Paul learn about Jesus? It seems like other people were in this movement before him, Dr. Price. And there's this, let me start with the Christian idea, then we'll get into some scholarship real quick, and then have your take on it. First things Christians do is they read the Gospels as if they're actually the first things written, or at least they seem to be. Kids are reading Matthew, Mark, Luke. They start with that. They get their conceptions of what that says. Then they apply it to everything after. So anytime Paul comes up, they're already thinking the Gospels on Paul. They don't separate these ideas, which is something very important if you're trying to understand what each book and the particular people might be saying. So they start with Matthew, Mark, Luke. They start with Matthew. Hence, most of them think Matthew came first because, well, church tradition teaches these ideas. And then they get to Paul, and Paul is just kind of like validating what the Gospels already say. And they don't start with Paul. But then when you get technical in scholarship, you have historicists and mythicists who wrestle with this Jesus character. Paul absolutely has a heavenly Christ. Anyone, I mean, most of the historicists I even talk to think this. They just don't say, well, Christ was heavenly altogether and was never an earthly being. I don't want to make this completely about mythicism, even though I know this is going to come up in your discussion on this topic. But if we separate Paul and say, all right, let's read him first since he precedes the Gospels, where did he learn about Jesus from?
Well, this brings up, this is an interesting way to focus it because the Gospels are post-Pauline. And therefore, if Paul is earlier and has no details about a historical Jesus, that implies that nobody knew of such a critter at the time. Jesus wasn't remembered as a teacher, or Paul would have had some teachings of Jesus to refer to, which he doesn't. He seems to refer to heavenly revelations from Christ, but that's a whole different thing. If Jesus was a healer and miracle worker, it's pretty amazing that never comes up in the Pauline epistles, and it seems even to be denied that Jews seek signs, but we have to disappoint them. All we've got is Christ and him crucified. Why would you have to disappoint them if you knew of all these miracle stories? I mean, Mark and Luke didn't seem to think miracle stories were worthless, right? And so why would Paul have? But the thing is, and by the way, that can be worked another way, like David Oliver Smith has fascinating books where he says it appears that the gospel writers did know the Pauline epistles, which implies that they were earlier. I have to admit, I have never been quite convinced of that. The parallels don't seem as exact as it does to some. But I'm also unconvinced that the Pauline epistles are older than the Gospels. I don't think you can put them on this line of theological evolution and whereas you could infer from them an evolution of Christology, the belief about Christ, that he was a heavenly being exclusively and eventually was thought to have lived on earth. Yeah, that does make sense for various reasons, but that's not the same thing as relative dating of documents because the early church was simply not uniform. All those arguments assume the old Orthodox view of the single early church where everybody believed the same thing. And even if you're a mythicist, that's kind of what you're saying, that everybody in the early period must have been Docetists or mythicists or whatever, and eventually everybody switched to this belief in an incarnate Christ on earth. We don't know that. All we know is here are a couple of different types of belief in Christ, and that they may have grown up separately and at the same time. Walter Schmidholz argues something like that when he says that the community that used Q knew nothing about Jesus as a Messiah or anything like that, and eventually somebody decided to bring the streams together, and in the Gospel of Mark and then the other ones to take the heavenly Christ come down to earth and have him speak these things. Where'd the Q sayings come from? Well, must have been from this guy. And most of them don't really have any explicit reference to Jesus anyway. It's just that whoever compiled them had Jesus said, like the Gospel of Thomas. Or even less so, like the Proverbs of Solomon. It doesn't say Solomon said, and so forth. They just figured, well, he's the great wise guy. Let's attribute them all to him. So I don't know that that you can say which group came earlier or later, but a reason for thinking that the Pauline, quote unquote, epistles are not earlier than the Gospels is this very issue of where would he have learned about Christ? And you suddenly look at the Epistle of the Galatians, where Paul is made to say, I learned nothing from any human source. The gospel I preach came to me directly from Christ, by which he seems to mean spiritual revelation. He never mentions the Damascus Road thing, so that's read in, but you might say it was something like that, some kind of revelation, but not from, and he didn't inherit it from any human source. But in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, or somebody in Paul's name says the exact opposite. I delivered to you first of all what I was taught, namely Christ died for our sins, etc., etc., etc. Well, which is it? I was on the phone on a debate with my pals, Mike Licona and Gary Habermas, and I don't say that ironically. I think they're both great guys. I like them and consider them friends. But I said, what about this? I mean, how can you harmonize this? And they just profess not to see any problem. I said, well, what do words mean? I don't see how I can get around that. So the idea of where did Paul learn this? You got two different estimates depending on which of these epistles you read. And so it could be that he had just absorbed various ideas from Tarsus, if he was actually from there, where you had a dying and rising god Mithras. That was the headquarters of Mithraism and really where it was invented. And who knows? He certainly is depicted as knowing about the savior gods of the mystery religions in 1 Corinthians, where he says, you cannot partake of the table of Christ and that of demons, for there are many gods and lords, kurioi, but for us, just one, the Father, and is the one God, and the one Lord is Jesus, the agent of creation and so forth. So he knew that there's an analogy between Christ and these other kurioi, these mystery religion gods who were saviors, some of whom died and rose, etc. I'd like to think of something with H.P. Lovecraft, one of my literary idols. He perhaps his most famous creation is a fictive book of blasphemous, mind-blowing elder lore called the Necronomicon. Where'd he get this idea? He figured he made it up, or that it came to him in a dream, as no doubt it did. But as a kind of amateur classicist, it's hard to believe he didn't know about Manilius's book, the Astronomicon, the book of the stars. And it must have been, or another one, where did he come up with the name of his deity, Nyarlathotep? Well, that also, he said, came to him in a dream, but we know he was a great fan of the Irish fantasy writer Lord Dunsany. And in Dunsany's book, he created kind of an artificial mythology like Lovecraft did. And he has a prophet named, I think, named Mynarthotep, and a god named Alhireth Hotep. Well, Lovecraft was certainly aware of these names, but Nyarlathotep came to him in a dream. Well, obviously, his subconscious took bits and pieces of these literary props that he was very familiar with. And fused them. Well, in the same way, Paul, whoever he was, may have had a revelation in a dream, or on the Damascus Road, or on the road to San Jose, or whatever it is, and it came together. The theophanies of Yahweh and the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, Attis, Adonis, Osiris from the neighboring religions. Who knows? I mean, that's not exactly information, but it's lore that he could easily have simply put together in an eclectic fashion, not wittingly. I mean, his subconscious may have put it all together.
I mean, it's
not very difficult.
It's hard to believe that there's not something like that going on with the whole Lord's Supper thing. I mean, that's clearly Dionysus.
Yeah.
Like Dionysus is doing this. Osiris is doing this. It's hard to believe he didn't know something prior, like there's something else going on here. So I'm with you on that. Real quick.
Everybody else did.
Yeah, that's Robin Swilly super chat. And he said, he said, love Dr. Price. Hi from Brandon, Mississippi. I think he had a question too. I think he said, I don't know how you'd want to answer this. Josephus Flavius, E.G. Paul invented Jesus, right? Or reinvented or compiled the Jesus.
Well, Joe Atwill thinks that Josephus wrote the Gospels, or at least presided over a group who did. And I just don't see. I think a simpler hypothesis would be that the Gospel writers who said a whole lot more than Josephus ever says about many, many things in terms of ethics and religion and all that stuff. I think you might say that they used Josephus. I'm sure they did, in fact, and borrowed bits and pieces from it. But I wouldn't identify Paul and Josephus. I mean, it might be one of those things where when we get to heaven, there'll be this big seminar where they'll say, well, here's a few surprises for you. Anything could be true, but I just don't see any reason to think that.
Thank you, Dr. Price. I hope that answered what you were asking, Robin, and thanks for that super chat. Cade Welly says, my confirmation teacher once told me that the Bible says the only unforgivable sin is to deny Jesus. How true is this statement?
Well, it does say you're damned if you do that, that whoever in this sinful and adulterous generation who denies me, well, the Son of Man will deny him when he comes with the glory of his angels and his Father and all that. Right. That really comes into prominence with a figure of Peter, who does exactly that 3 times. I mean, talk about punching your ticket for the inferno. That whoever told that story certainly thought Peter was an apostate and headed and in hell. But others said, no. And even if there was a Peter, maybe he did that. I don't know. But there's it seems to me, as Alfred Loisy said, that this was just anti-Petrine propaganda. Like, look at all the crimes they accused President Trump of, that have now one by one been completely debunked. I mean, whether you agreed with his policies and so on, that's a whole different matter. But he was just repeatedly slandered by political opponents, and the same thing was not unlikely to have happened in the case of Peter and Paul. I think the notion of Paul persecuting the church was a libelous misunderstanding. It's secondary in many of the places it appears in the epistles, and it was probably originally just a statement by Jewish Torah Christians who understood Paul considered himself a Christian, but they said he's fighting the true faith, the faith of Moses and Jesus, and so he is persecuting the true faith. That didn't necessarily mean he was going around arresting people, which apparently wouldn't have had authority to do anyway, and so that it seems to me you got the same sort of thing, and we read about both of these shameful things, Peter's denials and Paul's persecution, as part of the great Catholicizing bargain. Well, if you Paulinists will accept Peter as a genuine apostle, and if you Petrinists will accept Paul, well, we will accept both of these slanders too, and say, well, they were repentant and forgiven. I don't believe, even if they were historical figures, that either of those things happened.
Interesting. Got another one here. Pet Mark, thank you for the super chat. The Hebrew word harish or haresh mean both magician and carpenter. Was the Greek word tekton lost in translation for craftsman or carpenter? I actually heard this too from James Tabor was saying something about being a stone worker. Tekton might have to do with a stone worker. But anyway, do you see that right there? The Hebrew word haresh mean both magician and carpenter?
I wasn't aware of a magician connection, but that if that's true, I mean, I don't know Hebrew, so how could I say? But even apart from that, as Geza Vermesh pointed out, definitively, to my mind, in a great book called Jesus the Jew, what has Jesus just done in the story where they say, isn't this the carpenter, the son of Joseph, and these are his brothers, and he's got sisters too? How did he come by this wisdom? Before the story goes off the tracks, thanks to clumsy redaction, trying to scotch tape to this story, the thing where they turn on Jesus and they don't like him, and in Luke they try to murder him and all that. Originally, it's like local boy makes good. It's saying I remember this guy was making a coffee table for me. Where did he get this education, this wisdom, and the healings? Well, he is preaching in the synagogue, which meant he was commenting on the Torah reading for the day, or the prophets, any Bible passage. And it's just like in Acts 14, where Paul and Barnabas show up at a synagogue to preach. And the leader of the synagogue says, oh, we have guests today. Brethren, would you care to come and comment on the scripture? And they do. Well, that's the common thing. They figured everybody was scripturally literate enough to share some comment. So Jesus has just been engaged in interpreting the scriptures. Well, what do you know, Vermesh says, it was a rabbinic proverb to comment on someone who was adept at interpreting the scripture, and saying, boy, if only we had a carpenter or the son of a carpenter to tell us what this means. Or not even a carpenter or the son of a carpenter could solve this one. And that's what that has to be what they're referring to. Not that he actually worked in a carpenter shop, but that he was he was surprisingly able to interpret the scripture as a layman. It's like these other places, like in the Gospel of John. This guy never had any official learning. How can he be this fluent in the scriptures? Or Peter and John in the book of Acts. These guys are just country bumpkins. How can they be such effective speakers? And so it seems to me it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus having a hammer and nails and a saw and all that stuff. And that's one less thing we know about Jesus. I mean, it could mean he was a guy with a carpenter's apron and all that stuff, but to me, Occam's razor indicates that Vermesh is right, that they're referring to him as an exponent of the scriptures.
Okay, good. I'll go with that. So, the only reason I stopped it was just to cut in and say, what do you think so far? Is Paul trustworthy? Can you believe Paul's story? My instinct here is to go with Dr. Price's Occam's razor and just strip away the information that is dubious, or there's no other source, or it doesn't make, it's irrational, or it doesn't appear, there's no secondary source. Just the non-empirical, just strip it away until we get to the bottom, till we get to the stalk. And the stalk, we know, is real.
Interesting.
So that's very much like what the question.
Hold on. So the question I have to you is, have a good day at work, Mika. How convinced are you, or firstly, question, how convinced before you came in here were you that Jesus was a thing, and Paul actually, has something to say that's really relevant to you and me and anybody else that's outside of his head, versus now listening to some of this? They're not even a third of the way through. So I don't know how long we're going to go, but I'm ready to go for the long haul. How about you? Haha. All right, we'll just carry on.
There's asking, yeah.
Yeah. And I see everyone's comments, by the way. I mean, I do see different takes and different ideas that float on here. I'm going to jump on super chats and then try to bounce back to the conversation. But there's so many questions I have and ideas I like to float around, Dr. Price, because if there's one thing that I do enjoy is listening to your take, understand why you think the way you do, and then listening to other scholars and understand why they think the way they do. But before I jump to conclusions, I think it's a proper thing to do is to ask other people who've read these things in their original languages, who've read far and wide, as to why they don't conclude what this other idea is, or what that. Before I draw my own, I think I'm going to start kind of sitting on the fence in a way on certain topics and investigate. And I say that as what I'm trying to say to the audience is there's a lot of people who have their conclusions. They heard a certain teacher. They believe exactly what they said, and they don't know all the different positions. I think it's a good exercise to say, I think that made a lot of sense, but I don't want to put too much concrete in it. I'm going to go over here and see what the others say and why they disagree with that idea.
Bravo. Yeah, you must.
I think it's important. And before you act like you know, and, things like that. So super chat from Asmode US UK1. Thank you for the super chat. Is Dr. Price aware of passages in the Gospels that make more sense in Aramaic than Greek? Are these passages more likely to be historical, or are they important?
Well, Joachim Jeremias was always referring back to the hypothetical original Aramaic, and he wasn't unrealistic with it. It wasn't crazy speculation. He said, what must the Aramaic have been to get translated into this Greek? And he then said that It doesn't guarantee Jesus said it if it's in Aramaic, but if you can't come up with any Aramaic equivalent, that looks like it's not from the historical Jesus. There's no reason to believe Jesus taught in Greek. So it's a plus for authenticity if it is translatable back into Aramaic. But that's about as far as he went, whereas I believe Morris Casey, another one of these omniscient scholars, he knew Aramaic better than I know English, and he kind of seemed to think that if it was in Aramaic, Jesus had said it. That's going too far, I think. But there are a very few places where I think that the underlying Aramaic may have been mistranslated. C.C. Torrey did really interesting work on this. I had an article in the Journal of Higher Criticism recently about this. And most of his proposed instances don't strike me as that compelling. It might make a teensy bit more sense, but it hardly matters. But there are a couple of them. But here's two good examples. George Lamsa, who also was a native Aramaic speaker, and wrote an interesting book called Gospel Light, where he talked about how the Aramaic language and its idioms cast light on the gospel text, and it's pretty interesting. Well, he claimed there'd been a mistranslation where Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. He says the word gamel, which is just the same really as in English camel, this word was also in a different context commonly used as it just fortuitously sounds like another word in English, cable, like a heavy, thick rope. And he said, boy, that makes more sense to me as an analogy. You can't force a heavy cable through the eye of a needle. That would make sense, but others have pointed out that this is not far from a well-known rabbinic analogy that says it's easier to get an elephant through the eye of a needle than for so-and-so. Oh, well, that kind of really weakens the case. It could have been either one, but the fact that it was rabbinic, the big animal, little hole, that kind of steals the thunder from it. It isn't necessary to posit that. Here's one I like better from Torrey. And it's not proof, but it really is striking. In Mark 14, I guess it is, where Jesus is in Bethany and the woman anoints him. And they're in the home of Simon the leper. What was he like? Michael Palin in The Life of Brian? Alms for next leper? They're going to a leper's house for dinner. You couldn't do that. That's, I mean, what are we talking about there? So what do you know? Torrey said that there is that the word that granted could be translated as leper in Greek. Could also mean, depending on the context, jar merchant. And what did we just hear about the anointing? She broke open a jar of perfume and anointed Jesus with it. Whoa, wait a minute. Is that just a pun? Or are they saying this is why she had this ready to hand? So I'm sorely tempted to think that, yeah, he was right. That's just been mistranslated. But who knows, really? So what I'm saying is that it's possible, but I don't know of any real knockdown, drag out instances where you can be sure of that.
Wow, that is interesting. Well, a lot of people flown in to this live. Hit that like button if you don't mind. It helps us grow. And real quick, I forgot to even do our little intro spiel. Ladies and gentlemen, check out Dr. Price's website in the description. You could support him on Patreon, of course, and he's got monthly contributions, and he does his what is it? The Bible Geek that you launch on here? Or is it something else? I forget. It's what is it?
Yeah, the Bible Geek and the Human Bible.
Okay. And then, of course, I've got the Patreon, and I want to show real quick, tease everybody real fast with something. I'm going to share my actual screen. So let me know if you see. Do you see my screen, Dr. Price?
Yes. There's a beach and the ocean.
Okay, cool. So down here, Elaine Pagels. This is all. I'm not done editing. I just did our Heretics Anonymous, but every single one of these videos right here, there's 30 of them, are Elaine Pagels that I recorded with her. So, like, most of them are over 10 minutes long each. Those will be up on Patreon early. Dr. Joel Baden, all of these right here, Professor Joel Baden. And then, of course, Dr. John J. Collins. This was in his office, and I got a bunch of books from him when I, was up there. He's like, grab what you want.
Did we lose our connection?
I think I captured just now. I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body. I can't really say. But, yeah. Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, there's the plug. Thank you all for the likes and taking the time to take a peek. Dr. Price, your Judaizing Jesus book's coming out, and looking forward to reading your When Gospels Collide, because where contradictions become revelations is an interesting thing, especially after a little snippet last night in the Heretics Anonymous.
By the way, I did just email you the file for that.
I got
book,
it.
so you'll get it. Oh, good.
Yeah. I'm excited to look through it when I get an opportunity and see what's going on there. Something interesting we were talking about this last night briefly about they doubted, right? And to me, Paul has obviously a visionary Christ. You pointed out in 1 Corinthians 15, for example, it sounds like he's learning from someone according to this creed. But then here, Paul's saying, I received nothing. It all came from Christ. And then you make kind of an argument, like a reality kind of argument. Well, you pick up snippets from areas, and then you incorporated them into your subconscious, if you will, and act like that just came directly from heaven or whatever it might be. But really, you've been picking up the pieces. Do you think that works as well, possibly on the historicist side? Because one of the things I enjoy about you, Dr. Price, is though you think mythicism makes more sense, you know how to put on the hat and play the role. So do you think there's a good way of explaining Paul not knowing this earthly ministry and him not performing miracles and stuff like that didn't matter to him? Do you think there's a strong argument from the historicist side to make sense of this?
I don't believe so. It seems to me contrived, any argument I have heard. Like the one that's the least embarrassing is that Paul, not having seen it, wasn't interested in it. He was only interested in the risen Christ, though he knew that he had been crucified, and so there was a historical Jesus, but he had never met him. Of course, somebody's trying to paper that over by saying that he went to the Jerusalem pillars to get their stamp of approval on his preaching. It just seems to me that is unlikely. And the fact, for instance, that he says there are people, Greeks seek wisdom, Jews seek signs, but we preach only Christ and him crucified. What would be wrong about quoting Jesus if you knew something he had said, or saying that there were miracles and so on, because Paul is made a miracle worker in those letters. He says he did miracles and all that. So But the really absurd thing is that, he knew all the teachings of Jesus and even alluded to them without saying where they came from. That is just so ludicrous. You can tell people have a guilty conscience about that one. There is no way to make sense of that with a historical Jesus, it seems to me.
I just saw this on Facebook is the reason I wanted to do this live. And someone brought up, like, where did Paul learn about Jesus? Where did he learn this from? We obviously use mimesis and see that people are using stuff from the Hebrew Bible to kind of build upon narratives about the Christ, about Jesus. But what would you argue? What would be the clearest indication of where Jesus, I guess you'd say, he got his ideas from Jesus from? Do you think that some earlier movement, like some people say there was an earlier Jerusalem sect, so to speak, that was more Essene-like, and Paul is doing a mystery school version of that, so to speak? What do you think?
Well, it could be because we hear things like in the epistles, if someone preaches another Jesus, a different spirit, etc. If you've got talk like that going around, it's just too confusing to say. Could the two Jesuses have been fortuitously named the same thing for two different sects? Because it does mean Yahweh is salvation, and eventually they got together. Like you can tell that there were two Melchizedek sects in the early church that fused together. And we know that from the church fathers that one was Gnostic, one was not. And if you look at the Melchizedek document in the Nag Hammadi texts, it's pretty clear that this is a fusion of scripture from both of those groups. That might have happened with Jesus. In fact, Burton Mack confirmed my suspicion that he thinks that there are multiple roots for the Jesus Christ of the New Testament. There were the Jesus movements, plural, and the Christ cults, plural, and that they eventually came together, so that Jesus Christ is the fruit, not the root of early Christianity. And it's impossible to know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. In fact, I argue for a similar scenario about Paul being Simon Magus and the early Christians of Jerusalem being the Dead Sea Scrolls sect, and the thorny relations between Paul and the pillars mirror the split between the spouter of lies and the Council of 12 at Qumran and so forth. None of which is original with me. I'm just putting bits and pieces together, but that kind of scenario, yeah, why not?
I just figure I'd ask. I know there was a New Testament scripture that talks about different gospels and different Jesuses. Even in the New Testament, different Jesuses.
Yeah.
Like, what the heck? Yeah, like, what the heck are you doing? And I have to admit, like, I could rationalize this. I could try to say, you get where I'm going with this. Like, I could try to say, well, there's different versions that people are believing about this guy. But that's making plural. It sounds like it's making more than one of this Jesus. And so Jesus seems more than just a single individual guy in that. It's just really weird. Real quick, I wanted to address this, read between the lines. I would love to interview Earl Doherty. I need to email him still, but I heard
he isn't doing it.
He ain't?
I did email him about it, and he says he appreciates the offer, but he's just been out of it for too long and doesn't want to. It's like John J. Collins. He's sort of just retired from everything.
Yeah. Well, John, I don't think he's retired from wanting to join us on shows, but he's retired from the college. So that's a good thing. And hopefully we can get him on with you. Eric Johnson, thank you for the super chat. How could St. Paul be inspired if he couldn't remember if he baptized the house of Stephanus.
You mean how is this compatible with an inspired scripture?
I think so.
I think that,
yeah, they're arguing kind of like, how could Paul be inspired if he can't even remember if he baptized the house of Stephanus?
yeah, that's an excellent question. It just, the actual Bible we have just does not accord with doctrines of inspiration, in my opinion. And that, I mean, that is a prime example of it. It seems a bit more like it does when it's been doctored by like the Deuteronomic school and all that. And some writers, it's been suggested Luke thought he was writing a new scripture. But it's hard to know really what they thought. But when you have stuff like that, he couldn't have thought that. And that doesn't mean it wasn't true, but it does cast doubt on it, because if all of this came from the Holy Spirit, what is the Spirit not saying? Hey, you idiot, it was the household of Stephanus. I just find that absurd. Did God inspire Paul to say, by the way, when you come to visit, bring my overcoat and the scrolls that I left with so-and-so? Did the Holy Ghost tell him to do that? It just seems preposterous. That's why liberal Protestants like Harry Emerson Fosdick and C.H. Dodd sort of changed the idea to not so much an inspired text, but texts written by inspired writers, in the sense that they were religious geniuses. So you don't expect everything they said to be like that, but this accounts for the depth and wisdom you often find there. But that's like saying Shakespeare was inspired, which we even speak of, his muse. Well, that's, if you take that literally, as they used to, that is saying the Holy Ghost told him how to write Hamlet. We sort of gotten past that, and we understand that it's like the subconscious or something that is flowing out of the writer. And you can easily see how somebody, I find as I write, that it feels to me as if I'm receiving it. But I don't believe in channeling from some, from Ramtha or something like that. But nor do I discount everything channelers say. Only 99% of it. But what they're doing is speaking from their own subconscious. The guy that wrote Conversations with God happens to have an idiot for an inner self, and so it comes out painfully stupid. But he experiences it as coming from within or without or whatever. So it's a real tricky thing. And to redeem talk of inspiration, more liberal theologians wind up evacuating inspiration of any meaning, because they'll say, well, yeah, when you have James and Paul disagreeing on important doctrinal matters, what's the problem? We've got a spectrum of opinions, and we have the responsibility to consider the different wisdoms and all that. You're still reducing it to a bunch of people's opinions, like the old slogan, the gospel's not good views, it's good news. Well, if it's really just good views, inspiration guarantees nothing and provides no authority. It's like saying, well, I know this narrative can't be historical, but who's to say God doesn't inspire fiction? Jesus told parables. That's reasonable enough, but what's the result? It's not particularly special, except in the way you and I see it, that it is immensely fascinating. We love it, but we don't have any obligation to believe that it happened anymore. So inspiration, it's just a password. It's just putting a halo on. It's like Francis Schaeffer used to say, a connotation word. I think he was largely writing bunk, but there are a few insights Schaeffer had that I still stand by today, and that's one of them.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Yeah, I wish he would come on, read between the lines. And yeah, Dr. Price pulled on that one. And if he said no to Price, he's definitely saying no to me. All right, so there's so much stuff I could talk to you about, but I'm going to focus on questions from the audience because that's what I love doing. I haven't been around for a while. Guys, I was traveling for 7 days, went to Colorado, went to Connecticut, was interviewing scholars, and I haven't even got the time to edit all these videos that I'm going to be putting up on Patreon and slowly making them to YouTube. So if you have a super chat, I'll jump to you first, and then I'll try and go back. I see like Rochester Johnny's question, Heretic, but I'm going to go to the super chats because you guys are obviously helping the channel grow, and then I'll be able to jump to other questions from there. So Silas, thank you for the super chat. What is Dr. Bob's views on pantheism?
Here's another one where I agree with Schaeffer. I find pantheism attractive. The idea that there is Spinoza was the great modern pantheist, and he was kicked out of the synagogue for it. Some people said Spinoza was an atheist, and others said, oh no, he's God intoxicated. It's like a drunk sees the pink elephant. Spinoza sees God everywhere. Well, they're both right, because Spinoza didn't believe there was a personal God. If you think of any kind of even non-corporeal entity that has a consciousness and has plans and a will for you and all that, you're limiting God. So God must be the hidden nature of everything. And the religious person understands and beholds that in the waterfall, in great art, in the stinking street person, everybody, anybody, everything. You see a level of dignity because of the divine nature. But ultimately, if everything is God, then nothing is God. And Schaeffer used to say, it boils down to pan-everythingism. And I think old Schaeffer was right. I don't see what it adds to our understanding.
It's so funny you say that, because I kind of started becoming a pantheist. Real quick, peace out, Blue Green. Thanks for the super chat. He says he'll catch up later as England are playing. I think he's got a game on. Love you, love to you both. Thank you so much, Blue Green. Appreciate that.
You.
Really do appreciate the super chat, man. Back to this whole thing. Like when I started deconverting, I saw God like the elephant, those 6 wise men and the elephant, and they're all blind, and all the cultures are blind. They're all trying to touch God, and they all have part of it right, but really God's in all of it. God is the whole thing and everything and all that. And at some point, I just started realizing, like, when you draw that conclusion, nature is God then. So naturalism to me becomes the ultimate. Like, okay, I'm fine with nature. And if there is a God that's like that, he doesn't give 2 flying bleeps about what I believe. He is it. And he is, I guess you'd say, manifesting himself, itself, herself, whatever you want to call it, by being involved in the very mind of myself. And I'm living out it. And therefore, like, what is there's nothing to lose. You're not going to go to hell. There's no, like, you know what I mean? Which is a cool idea, don't get me wrong. But I feel like, personally, it's a position that's trying to hold on to some idea that there must be some divine maker, because they're all struck by the wonderness of the world and the experience that we have. And I get it. I'm not trying to downplay experience. We had this talk last night, but I also am looking for natural, like, what is the possible natural explanation for why I had a religious experience? Could it be that I had certain chemical reactions take place in the brain under certain traumatic situations that are causing me to have that kind of experience, that just happened? So, yes, I'm downplaying it. We had this talk last night. The young man was saying, Derek, you said that you are like Thomas, and that if Jesus appeared to you and said, touch my wounds in my side, that would be sufficient evidence for you to believe in Jesus. And I said, yeah. And you followed up with a caveat by saying, but I'd also want to check my mental faculties and make sure I wasn't hallucinating. And it seemed like the way he said it, like he was trying to say, Derek, you're already trying to make up excuses for why you wouldn't believe it even if it did happen. No, I'm trying to say, when does that ever happen? Am I tripping balls? I mean, am I like, did someone spike my drink? Jesus just appeared to me and said, fill my hands and my side, look at my feet. I'm eating with you. I'm the real guy. By the way, I would need to know that he was the real guy because I was walking with him supposedly for the past at least year, maybe years. So I know what he looks like.
You even interviewed him.
I even interviewed him from Australia. So, anyway, thank you so much, guys, for listening to me rant.
I got to say something germane to that. A Wittgensteinian disciple, D.Z. Phillips, a Welsh philosopher, a really incredible take on religion and a unique way of looking at it. He said, what would it take to convince you that it was really Christ? Or he used the example, sort of a non-prejudicial one. Right. Suppose a Viking is in a battle. Somebody clunks him on the head with a club and he loses consciousness. Some unknown duration later, he wakes up and he's in this fabulous dining hall. If you've ever been to West Point and been in their dining hall, it's amazing. And huge vaulted ceilings, stonework, everything. Well, suppose he's there and there are mugs of mead there and hot-looking women in winged helmets and all that stuff. Would he conclude that he was in Valhalla? Well, he might, but then he would have to wonder, is this really Valhalla? How does it stack up with what I expected? And it also reminds me of a great old Penthouse cartoon where these two slobs are sitting in dingy white sheets on a naugahyde couch in a room that's bare with cracked plaster, and from the ceiling there's just one naked light bulb hanging down, and on the wall there's a crooked plaque that says heaven, and the guys are wearing like wire halos, and one says to the other, somehow I thought it would be classier than this. Well, Phillips says, what would it take for it to live up to your expectations? And that, you could always imagine it being even more spectacular. So did you really have a concrete expectation? You say, I believed I'd go to heaven. Well, what would it have to be like before you would say, well, this can't be a hallucination, etc.? Or Pat Robertson, according to rumor, he had a camera crew ready to film the second coming because he thought he calculated when it was down. This may be slander, I don't know, but there was this rumor anyway. Suppose that he broke into all the news channels and showed this blazing bright figure descending from the sky, and he says, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. Prophecy has been fulfilled. This is our Lord Jesus Christ. The millennium is at hand. Could you really be sure? Wouldn't you have to ask, is this some kind of CGI thing? What would it take? It's not hyperbolic doubt. You'd have to say, well,
I was going to say, it'd be interesting. Our technology is getting quite advanced, and someone's going to be able to pull a trick like that on people pretty soon. Like a whole city is going to fall for something like that, and someone's going to create a certain light or somehow have it descending from the sky in a dark night or something, and people are going to go, oh my gosh. It's just going to heighten them to already probably support their already preconceived notions that they have. It's Buddha. No, it isn't. It's Jesus. What are you thinking? Like
It's true, You just know that's going to happen, and people are going to fall for it. I totally agree. I was thinking about something quickly, and it's maybe silly, but if I were to preach, and from the bottom of my heart, the whole I know it because it's been revealed to me thing. If I were to go around and preach that no matter what, everybody who dies, the price of life is eternal hell. Everybody. Doesn't matter what you do on earth, doesn't matter anything. The fact that you were given life is followed by eternal hell. And that was my shtick. That was my preaching. That was my message. If I were to preach that, it would be unfalsifiable, just as unfalsifiable as the nonsense of Jesus. So that's one way I was thinking of counteracting or fight or out stupidifying, if there's such a word, coming up with something more crazy than Christianity, or than the preachings of Christianity. And if you preach that hell is the only option when you die, no matter what you do on earth, then it's crazy. But it's no more crazy than what the Christians are preaching to you today. That's just what I was thinking about. Anyway, the talk's not finished. These guys are right in the middle of it. So let's get back to them. Shall we?
Or whatever it might be. Someone's going to have a different take on it. Dr. Price, let me get to these questions real quick with some of these people who are asking. Yeah. Johnny asked, Rochester Johnny, thank you. Doesn't the Old Testament talk about fictional beings who were born of a woman but impregnated by angels?
Well, I think that if you read between the lines, at least the original would have been angels or God as the angel of Yahweh impregnating these women. And that it reflects a cultural thing still going on today in sub-Saharan Africa and in Arabia, where a woman is unable to have children. And this is a big shame, like Hannah, she says, remove my reproach among men because I can't have kids. Well, a shaman, sometimes thought of as an angel, is making his rounds like Elijah did in the Bible. And so they say, Father, she can't bear children. Can you work a miracle? And so he says he needs to spend the night in the same room with her, praying. I mean, just like Elijah excludes everybody from the room. And see you in 9 months. And sure enough, she gets pregnant. And of course, he has impregnated her. And the problem was not with her, but with her husband. He had too low a sperm count. But how are they to know that? And right. So they believed that she was miraculously impregnated. And of course, not everybody did believe it, but that was the face-saving device. You could say she was impregnated miraculously, and people might have known, well, yeah, he couldn't do it, and this guy did. But that's all right. We're not going to say that. So a great book by M.J. Field, an anthropologist, called Angels and Ministers of Grace, talks about this. And I think that lies behind these stories. It's almost exactly the same thing. And so that Samson, Samuel, John the Baptist, Isaac, others, and possibly Jesus, if these people really existed, that's what happened. But they probably didn't. And yet this is the myth that gave rise to that.
Interesting. Thank you for that question. I'm taking questions. If you guys want to skip the line, just shoot a super chat. Heretic asks, MythVision podcast, given mimesis, Greek mythology in the Bible, is there no surprise that the number of Jews converting to Christianity was low? and that Gentiles of a different culture took it on?
That is a good point, though. Judaism was Jews, many were already so Hellenized that either they knew about these myths and possibly accepted them, or mixed them in with their faith. Like we have in North Africa, a sarcophagus of a wealthy Jew who had an elaborately carved sarcophagus, and it shows the menorah and also the wheel of Attis that was a symbol of his resurrection. So somebody had a foot in both camps there. The Dura Europa synagogue from the 200s CE that had like a mosaic floor where you had Hercules riding a chariot through the wheel of the zodiac. So there was Judaism. It was very cosmopolitan, and what apologists always say, oh, they wouldn't have put up with any Greek influence. That's just absurd. There were Jews who wouldn't, but the reason that Mattathias and his sons in the Maccabees, the reason they had that revolt against the Seleucids was so many Jews were assimilating paganism. Right. You don't have a reaction to something that's not happening. And we're told that they celebrated the rites of Dionysus, and that's what steamed up these ultra pious traditionalist Jews. So there was plenty of syncretism. And in fact, it's worse for their argument, because the later you go in history, the more strictly isolated you have to figure that rabbinic Judaism was getting, and unfriendly to outside influences. But even as late as this, they apparently were henotheistic, syncretistic, and so forth. So the questioner has a good point, but you don't necessarily need to resort to that. A lot of them, like they may have thought Samson and Hercules were the same guy, and which they may have been, actually, variants of the same myth. And so that's, they all knew about the Iliad and the Odyssey and so forth. That was common knowledge.
Dr. Price, Socialist, thank you for the super chat. What is Dr. Bob's opinion on Michael Lawrence's theory that Christianity existed for centuries before its supposed creation? And you know that I interviewed him, I'm sure, but I'm sure you know his work. He wrote a book, 70.
I don't think.
He's the one who argues also.
Say again.
I think he makes a case, and this isn't the primary point of his thesis, but that Paul existed in the 1st century BC. I think, I could be wrong, but there's this idea, something like that. But for sure, if not that, I don't want to straw man or make a mistake. For sure that Christianity has been around for a while. It didn't start in the 30s. It started well before that. Do you not remember Michael Lawrence?
Yeah, I don't know the argument. I don't understand I just don't happen to know the argument or the evidence for that. It's a fascinating idea.
Have you ever heard of any of these theories that Christianity existed prior to the 1st century?
That rings a bell dimly. I must have read some summary of it, but it didn't stick with me. Fascinating, though.
Yeah, okay. So what I need to do is just email me, Derek at MythVisionPodcast.com or MythVisionPodcast@gmail.com. Email me, Socialist, and I will make sure that I get you Michael's materials so that you're at least acquainted with it, or at least contact Michael, because I have his contact, and say, hey, give me in a nutshell, a few paragraphs of what you're trying to say. Then I can actually present that to you, Dr. Bob. So thank you for that super chat.
Great.
Hot Black Desiato, thank you for the super chat. Is Dr. Price familiar with Bocanism, a semi-humorous religion created by Kurt Vonnegut? I hope I'm saying that right, for his novel Cat's Cradle. It has some interesting concepts.
No, I've never read that. what is it called again? The
Read
what
that.
ism?
Can you see it? Are you not pulled up?
No, I've never heard of that.
Interesting. Okay, well,
The only
yeah, I just say that when that happens, email me more information about the topic in particular or any links or stuff like that. I'll make sure I send it to Dr. Bob, get his thoughts. Jason Stewart, thank you for the super chat. Do you think Islam is a descendant of Ebionism or even created by Meccan Ebionites? I hope I'm saying that right. Meccan, Mekkan, Meccan Ebionites.
Oh, well, there certainly is a debt owed to Jewish Christianity in it, and I forget who said this, but that Islam was the greatest of the Christian heresies. I think that's a very reasonable statement, because they believe, as I'm sure you know, that Jesus was not crucified, that he was raptured up to heaven before they could arrest him, and that the crucifixion was an illusion or mistaken identity there, because the Quran is not explicit. It says those who thought they killed him and crucified him believed a lie, for it was only a simulacrum. In other words, it was an appearance. Now, what did that mean? Was it a hologram, like we would say, or did it mean that it was somebody else? And various commentators in Islam have put forth theories that it was actually Pontius Pilate on the cross made to look like Jesus, or it was Satan, or it was Judas Iscariot, or that it was Sergius, an otherwise unknown Roman agent that pretended to be a disciple. And their theory is that, why did the arresting party need Judas to point Jesus out? And they realized that's a little problematic. It's like saying, which one of you guys is Elvis? So they said, well, that would be necessary if they all looked like Jesus. And so that they were all miraculously transformed in an illusory fashion, and that one of them was crucified as Jesus, though he wasn't. Well, that idea, in one form or another, it's a form of docetism, seemism. It seemed like he was crucified, but he was not. There were other versions of it that said, yeah, he was crucified, but he survived it, or he didn't suffer, or whatever. I mean, there were a lot of different variations on this. But where did Muslims get that? I have to assume it was from Gnostics or some type of Jewish Christians. They believed at some point that you had to be circumcised, and that you had to keep the dietary laws. In fact, they still say no pork, for instance. It's hard to know what they picked up and when. In a super terrific book called Hagarism, the authors Patricia Crone and Michael Cook argued that they examined neglected early Christian, Jewish, and Islamic sources that give an idea of the kind of debates they had in the earliest generation of the faith. And it turns out that it really went through different convolutions fast, because the new community was trying to establish some sort of distinctive identity. So they would borrow elements from Christianity, Judaism, and Samaritanism, and then drop some of them. They venerated the cross at first, but later they said, no, Jesus wasn't crucified. And they ridiculed the pork taboo, but then they embraced it. and so forth, like they were trying to triangulate and come up with a unique Islamic voice. Well, so anything that looks like Jewish Christianity may have come directly from it in the earliest days, or it might have been a later borrowing. We can't really tell, but I think they did have material that came one way or another from Jewish Christianity and Gnosticism.
Thank you, Dr. Price. Coffee Zealot, thank you so much for the super chat and this here. He says, hey, Derek, been watching your videos for months. First time I watched it live. Just want to thank you for all the passion you put into your work. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm passionate about it. I want to try and understand, this thing had me gripped. I can't tell you guys how much I love this. At the same time, like really, unthreading it to understand what really happened. I say this publicly. I love the Bible. I love it more than I ever thought I'd love it, because now I see it as a piece of literature, a piece of history, a piece of myth. And you guys, I don't know if you appreciate it with me like this, but like I see and value it for what it is, not for what I made it to be in the Christian bubble. And that alone made me go, wow, this thing's affected. Like seeing how this literature and versions of Christianity and different movements have caused us to look at this text and project it on the world. Like I had dreams the end was going to happen soon. I mean, I really was afraid. And when I got my first child, when I got my wife pregnant with my first child, I told my wife, I said, I feel like a horrible parent. And she said, well, why, honey? And I said, I mean, I'm bringing this life into this world when the tribulation's about to happen and God's about to come back, and it's going to be wickedness all over planet Earth. It's going to be destruction. I believed like this is how bad it was. I was going to bring my child into this world. This is what Paul seems to imply. Like some of us are going to be taken, and I believed that. Now I appreciate it for being a human piece of literature and understanding how religious thought evolves and where people come up with ideas like this. Not because I believe it, but because I like to dissect it. It's like the magic trick. If I got a phone call from one of these magicians, he says, hey, I'm going to come show you how I do my trick. I'm going to go and see how he does the trick. And I'm going to be like so happy to know how it happened and what really took place. So thank you so much, man, for that. Oh, wow. We got a big one here. Ricky Green. Ricky. Oh,
yes. He's very generous.
Yeah, dude. You always come through, man. I can't tell you. You got to contact me. You seriously got to reach out to me, man. If I can do anything like private video recordings or something and ask your questions, man, please let me know. You do this a lot. Your sins are pardoned. You can go live whatever heinous type of lifestyle you prefer. Don't worry. You won't have any regrets. I can promise you, or regrets, depending on that tattoo. Good Saturn's Day, gents. In studying ancient Sumerian religion, Anu, the sky god, seems to be an El of Canaan character, and Enki, Enlil, seem to have a Yahweh Bel type feud. Is there any way that Sumerian could have later affected the Canaanites? Love you guys. We love you too. Thank you so much. Dr. Price, I love this conversation because Yahweh, El, and the Canaanite pantheon, it just, it really unthreads a lot, but can you maybe address this question and give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe that even though the Sumerians were not a Semitic people like the Babylonians and Israel and so on, that their mythology was inherited by the Babylonians, the Gilgamesh epic and all of that. And so that it was passed down, apparently. The Akkadians had it from the Sumerians, and then the Babylonians and Assyrians had it, and sometimes they had different names for the various gods. And there was great Babylonian influence on Israelite belief, like the whole thing with the netherworld of Sheol seems to be just borrowed directly from Babylon, but it also occurred in the Gilgamesh epic where we have the most detailed description of it. So that pushes it way back to Sumer. And so, yeah, I think so. And with it's increasingly clear, I think, that that Baal and Baal Hadad, Hadad, and Yahweh are the same entity. That they're both described in the same terms. They're storm gods who ride the clouds. The cherubs are very likely personified clouds. They cast the lightning bolts. Obviously, they're just like Thor, Indra, Zeus, and others. And to show you how these things are dumbed down, when I was a kid, I was told tongue-in-cheek that the thunder in the sky was the angels bowling. And I'd rather have the battling in the sky. But at any rate, but yeah, and so they're basically the same. And behold, he cometh with the clouds, and so forth. And El is simply the same name in both. I mean, you can have different suffixes. So El, Elyon, El Shaddai, Eloi, my God, and stuff like that. But El is the father of Baal, so he's really the supreme god, though not necessarily the most popular one. But eventually, just as in Israel, you had the Deuteronomic reform where they streamlined it and said that Yahweh and El Elyon are the same God after all. I think the same thing happened with the Canaanite, Babylonian, etc. version, because you start hearing about Elyon Baal, Most High Baal. So it seems to me that even that late, you had the same things going on in the two religions. The big shocker of these Ugaritic texts from Canaan, the Rosh Shamra texts, was that we found out that the Hebrew and Canaanite languages are closely cognate, and we have that, and that caused some translations to be different, just like we were saying earlier with Greek translations of Aramaic and the Gospels. Well, and if you find out that, hey, this Aramaic sheds some new light on that Greek, well, in the same way, there were the New English Bible, for instance, took seriously certain cognate terms from Ugaritic and said they would make more sense than what we thought the Hebrew meant. So close, and so was the theology and the mythology, to the point where it just buttresses the conclusion that the Israelites simply were Canaanites. The Bible itself practically told us that, because of all these genealogical myths connecting the patriarchs of Israel, Edom, Moab, and so on and so on. These guys were descended from the brother of Abraham and so on. I mean, even they knew that they were all one big ethnic group.
He says Anu, the sky god, seems to be an El of Canaan character, or Anu.
Well, that would fit.
Yeah, interesting. And then he says, Enki, Enlil seem to have a Yahweh Bel type feud.
I don't know enough about the details, but if there are parallels, it probably does indicate that originally you're talking about the different versions of the same myth. And just like the thunder gods are all the same, even in India. But it is hard to tell whether you have the same God under a different name or an independently evolved God to fill the same niche, because you're always, just like in a superhero group, you're going to have somebody like Superman, somebody like the Flash. Like, look at the Avengers and the Justice League. In one there's Superman, and the other there's Thor, and one there's the Flash, and the other Quicksilver, and so on down the line. You got to have, or Star Trek episodes, right? With the different series, like Data isn't precisely the same as Spock, but even the difference is a dead giveaway, because Spock is always trying to suppress his humanity, whereas Data, an android, is trying to gain humanity. So it's the same sort of a thing going on. And you've got the heroic captains and so forth and so on. You're always going to have the or they may split them up. Like Spock was an alien who had telepathic powers and was pure logic. Well, they've split up those attributes, so Data has the logic, and Worf is the alien. And what was the other one?
Aren't they trying to outdo each other, though, in these ancient, seems like they're demythologizing in Genesis, for example, but they're also trying to outdo. They're trying to outdo the previous myth that they're borrowing from. It's like Matthew writing his version of the gospel. He's using Mark. He likes Mark's style, but he says, Mark doesn't know what he's talking about. Let me show you what the real gospel looks like. Or he didn't call it the gospel.
Surprising number of times, yeah.
Right. So it sounds like that just keeps happening, and this is just a human thing to look for, and to act like there's not a comparison here. It, to me, is just, I think it requires you being an apologist to not permit something like that to be the case,
It's like the old thing, well, Captain Marvel, the Martian Manhunter, these are just spurious fictions, but Superman, now he really existed. Why would you think so? What possible reason is there? And it's the same thing here. It doesn't really matter if these different gods were borrowed from one another. That's beside the point. It's just, why think that one of these is any more real than the others?
Good point. Really good point. And that's a valid point. Once again, Ricky Green, thank you for such a great super chat, man. You really come through, and thank you, Dr. Bob, for answering that. Robert Mahaney, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Doesn't look like you have a comment, but I appreciate the love, man. You always come through. And Christopher Malloy, he says, and thank you for the super chat, by the way. Has Dr. Bob ever read Ahmed Osman? I've heard this name before. He contends that Jesus, Joshua, and Tutankhamun were the same person.
Tutankhamun.
Yeah, far-fetched.
Yeah, I don't see that. Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with his views, and it just seems arbitrary to me. It's almost as if, well, we only have a few people we really know about in the ancient world, so let's pretend they're the only ones on Earth, and so that you got to link these guys up. There's not enough of them to go around, and I just it's sort of like this thing that somebody asked if Jesus was the son of Caiaphas, and he had some linkage. And I thought, you're just presupposing that anybody who shares a name was the same person, and you just can't do that.
I mean, let's admit, we know Jesus was supposedly a common name. Nonetheless, it has a theological implication, because there seems to be these Joshua cults popping up all over the place. They're going to take down the temple, the walls of Jericho, so to speak. Here you have a guy talking about, the walls are going to come down. The other one's saying, come out here in the wilderness. We're going to split the Jordan River. Joshua, obviously did the same thing. So there's highly suspicious reasons to look at this guy and go, what's fact or fiction here? It's tough to nail down on the cross, so to speak, what I'm saying. I'm just being stupid. All right, Bible bloopers. Hi, Derek. My friend Jeff, he puts the cry faces. What is up, Jeff? Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Email me, man. Email me. But I gotta say, man, I gotta say this, and I'm gonna wave out dirty laundry. When I disagree with friends of mine, I don't call them idiots or think they're dumb. And he didn't say that directly to me, but there are implications on people who think different. That all you have to do is make a video and put it out there and act like anyone who does something or thinks something different than you is an idiot. And I felt that that's what you were doing in the video. So I just said, I can't see that. I'm just not interested in why have that on my feed. But we've always had great conversations, man. And so email me. Let's talk about this. But honestly, man, I would tone it down. That's my personal suggestion, would be toning it down. But this is a free country. You can do what you want, and I totally understand, man. But I still love you. I just honestly don't want to hear that. I just don't want to hear any more of that kind of stuff. So thanks for the super chat, though. Look, he super chatted me, ladies and gentlemen, and he is a nice guy. Trust me. He's a friend of mine, actually. But there's certain times I don't want to see something. I'm not interested in dealing with certain things, right? So he says, happy faces. I thought you were laughing at me. All right. Well, thanks for the super chat again. Hit me up. Let's talk this out. But I really would recommend please toning it down, because I can't. We can disagree. Dr. Bob and I can disagree. But Dr. Bob, you don't call me any names. I'm totally fine with that. Unless you want to call me the Lambert of God. I'm totally cool with that one.
Oh, yes.
But seriously, I really do appreciate our conversations in the past. And I don't know why we're doing this with 300 people on the live right now, but come back to Jesus, brother. Come back.
Hallelujah.
I'm just kidding. Hit me up in an email, Jeff. Let's talk this out, man. No need to keep not talking. So, all right. Brute Facts Podcast. Derek and Pasta with Normalizing Atheism is going to teach me in maids' outfits, shaved legs, and commando. What? Hold on. Let me reread this. This is Eddie, by the way, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is Eddie, right? Derek and Pasta, I think he's talking about Pasta Mike, with Normalizing Atheism, is going to teach me in maids' outfits, shaved legs, and commando. Is this you, Eddie? Yes, it's Eddie. Ladies and gentlemen, Eddie, go subscribe to his channel. Listen, this guy just interviewed Dr. Richard Carrier. He is a Christian. Now, he wants to learn from Dr. Richard Carrier. Christians probably cringe at him. So that tells you need to subscribe to this guy. Seriously, though, when you have Christians not agreeing with a Christian, you might want to pay attention to that Christian, right? But I really appreciate what you do, Eddie, because you're talking across the aisle. Even though we disagree on some specifics, man, thanks a lot for doing what you do, and thanks for the super chat. Appreciate it. Yeah, Eddie is a great dude, Mike. We're gonna hold him to the whole wearing a maid outfit and shaving his legs. He's got a beard bigger than you, Dr. Price, and I'm gonna we gotta make you do that, man. You're doing the live like that now. Yes. Hold on. He says he's talking with you, Dr. Price. Hold on. I'm talking.
That's right. I'm going to be on his show soon.
What does that tell you guys? Okay, go check him out. You got to appreciate someone like that, man. He hangs out on an atheist YouTube channel, and he says and identifies as a Christian. We got to start figuring out how to talk.
Well, okay. Well, I thought we were talking about Paul and this mythical Jesus, but they're not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and navigate my way through their yada, whatever they're talking about. That's not Paul. So let's give it a try, huh?
Talk to each other, man. We got to figure out how to communicate when we disagree.
That just doesn't do much, does it?
In a way that's I'm right, you're wrong, you're an idiot, that kind of thing. So I really
That doesn't help.
appreciate it, seriously. It's a great practice, and you keep doing what you're doing, bro. You're going to heaven, by the way.
Well, that doesn't help either. I don't know how to reset this. Okay, let's try that.
Don't let anyone tell you you're not, okay?
Most Protestants don't preach.
Yes. I'm being an idiot by saying that, by the way. I am teasing, but he takes those jokes. I've seen his YouTube channel. He recently interviewed another, who was that? Oppie? Graham Oppie? Graham Oppie's a brilliant philosopher, but he's interviewing this guy. He's an atheist philosopher. It'll be soon. His beard is going to take over, and then what's going to happen is he's going to be like, all right.
Yeah, I'm just going to go forward a bit.
So it definitely hurts me when I'm not on lives with you guys giving super chats. But Dr. Price, Paul said, I am not a liar. I lie not. I'm not lying. No, I did not lie. I tell you the truth. I'm not lying. I'm telling you the truth. I do not lie. I lie not. I'm telling you the truth. Now, my wife, I told her this last night, that this is like a repeated phrase. Like these phrases get used a lot in this literature. I said, what do you think about that? And she goes, anyone who's saying things like that, repetitive, they're having to defend themselves for being accused of lying about something. So it sounds like he potentially could be lying, right?
Potentially.
Price, what do you think? Do you think Paul was lying, or do you think his opponents were lying about him? What do you think?
Well, I immediately think of the character with whom I identify him in the Dead Sea Scrolls, namely Simon Magus, or whoever the scrolls were calling the spouter of lies. And that I think Eisenman is right, and that's Paul. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was lying about anything. It may just mean that he can't believe that. He's just a false teacher. And so it's easy to imagine it's just simple polemics. It's a shortcut to getting people to hear him, people that hear him not to take him seriously. Like when one of the pastorals speaks of doctrines of demons, that in doctrines like inspired by demons. Do you suppose the Gnostics he was talking about really thought they were inspired by Satan? It's just that they, in their estimation, that's what it's got to be. And so I don't take that too seriously. Or why was Mary Magdalene said to be a sevenfold demoniac? I mean, that's pretty demonic. Well, we do hear from church fathers and so on that she was supposedly the teacher of some Gnostic sect in France. And so that implies that they understood her to be a false teacher. And so there wasn't necessarily a story, we never hear it in the Gospels, of her being delivered from 7 demons. How would you know there were 7 anyways, like the 7 dwarves? So that, I mean, that's, it seems to me it could easily just be nasty polemics.
Oh, also, ladies and gentlemen, go subscribe to Normalizing Atheism. That's my buddy there, Past the Mic, as well as Brute Facts. Question, Dr. Price, thank you for answering that. Yeah, there's definitely polemics there, but I'm wondering if he's lying, and it gets into the whole, I think you know where I was leading with that, but I want to ask the audience's questions, because I always have plenty of time with you to record these if we want to put them on video. And it was getting into the whole polemic of Peter and Paul and anti-circumcision concepts and things like that. And it sounds like he's trying to defend himself. I have authority. I'm not lying, that kind of stuff. So one of the questions we had was, Dr. Price, what was Jesus actually teaching, by Gregory Day? And there are more, but we just got a super chat, so I'll get that next. But I almost feel like I could answer this and say Jesus wasn't actually teaching anything because you say that there was no Jesus. But if what they put in the words of Jesus, would you say it's a conglomeration of various things from rabbinic teachings to Stoic ideas and et cetera, et cetera? I mean, or how would you want to answer this question? And then I'll get the super chat.
Well, if you wanted to, like one thing that set me on the mythicist road was the notion that it's sort of like the criterion of dissimilarity, not exactly, but if you look at the way Jesus is depicted in the Gospels, at least Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as an itinerant wisdom teacher and apocalyptic preacher, and they're not ultimately incompatible. Some of the parables are wisdom parables trying to set you straight, saying, look, in light of the soon coming end of the world, what do you think you're doing with your life? What is the wise thing to do? It's not to be conventionally prudent and save up your money for a rainy day, because there are not going to be any rainy days. And very soon now, it's going to be Armageddon. And so you should get some brownie points by using the money in the only way it'll do any good. In the meantime, feeding the starving. I mean, their stomachs are still, even if it ends next week, we don't want them starving to death now. So why don't you give your money away? So you see, that's wise. It's reasoned. It's not just craziness. So I get the impression he taught that sort of thing. We're told that he taught repentance and that God was open to anybody repenting. And in general, you get that impression that that's the picture being drawn. But then you have stuff in there that appears to have a whole different set of presuppositions. Harnack pointed this out. He said, how could Jesus have taught something like the parable of the prodigal son? It's never too late to repent. That's all you need to do. God forgives those who repent. If he had up his sleeve the idea, of course, that's only going to be true for a couple of more weeks, because then I'm going to die and you're going to need to be baptized in my name to be saved. Why didn't he say that? And Harnack,
that's later ideas.
Yeah, okay, being read back in, or like he said, the synoptic Jesus is all about the Father, but the Johannine Jesus is all about the Son. That can't be. I mean, it's obvious. So there's been a sea change in this. So I would say if there was a historical Jesus, and the one I just sort of, or statements about martyrdom and persecution, would that have been germane to Jesus' audience as he traveled around Galilee? Would it have made any sense? It's like the classic thing, whoever would follow me, let him take up his cross. That wouldn't have made any sense. That you're supposed to be a Christian and you know what happened to Jesus, like in 1 Peter, you got to follow in his footsteps. It assumes a later point in time. So I think if you bracket that stuff, you can come up with a plausible historical Jesus. It's just, I have other reasons for thinking that it is a conglomeration of available sayings. They were borrowing from each other. Like Jacob Neusner pointed out, we have the same statement attributed to several different rabbis in the Mishnah. Why? Did they all say it, or was there some point to proof texting this or that rabbi? So there are real reasons for doubting a historical Jesus, but my rule of thumb was, to the degree you have a coherent and plausible historical figure there, all the stuff that is, but obviously that partakes of Christology and Christian soteriology, has to be later material. And now I got different problems with the rest of it, but I can see that as a plausible way of saying, if there was a historical Jesus, what did he teach? And he might have been teaching revolution too. That's possible. That wouldn't be out of the realm. That wouldn't necessarily be incompatible.
Interesting. There's so much there that we could dig. Brute Facts Podcast, Eddie. Thank you again for the super chat. He says, I really like your approach, Derek, your respect and fun style. Quickly becoming one of my favorite atheists. I really appreciate your kind words. I seriously appreciate that, man. That means a ton. Yeah, like we had a Heretics Anonymous last night, Eddie, for example. We have it at Dr. Price's house once a month. And there's Christians that hang out and come, and we purposely have opposing views in this conversation to bring up whatever the topic might be. And yesterday it was psychedelic drugs and spiritual experiences or something like this in the vein of it. And Dr. Bob's wonderful wife, Carol, I call her Mom. She's like, that was her thing. She wanted to really run with that one. And there were Christians who were coming in saying, oh, no, it talks about pharmakia and, the Bible's against taking these drugs. But then you bring up the whole rabbis that were lighting marijuana up on the altars and probably tripping, if they were having hallucinations. It's possible, by the way. Most people think weed doesn't do that. But if you haven't smoked it in a long time, like I haven't, and then you go, let's say you were on pills for 5 or 6 years and you're trying to get clean off drugs. So you decide, I'll just smoke weed again. And then you end up smoking way too much all at once. You start to have weird outer body type of experiences. Trust me, take it from experience. I'm not recommending it. I'm saying that's what happened to me. So I kind of wonder if rabbis or ancient Israelite priests were doing these type of things. So,
well, that beautiful psalm where it says, God, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee. For thus have I seen thee in the temple, in seeing thy power and thy glory. When and how would a priest have seen that? What are they talking about? Well, the hallucinogen thing would make sense of that. I would have dismissed that as just a coincidence, but otherwise I'm not sure what it would mean. And the fact that they did come up with some sort of cannabis residue in a Jewish altar, well, that would make some sense.
It makes you want to revisit all of those passages. And not to say this is the case. This is we're just speculating for fun here. But it's like when Yahweh comes down in his dark cloud, okay? His presence is in this cloud. Well, if you've ever hotboxed a room ever in your life, Dr. Price, I know you've never done this. You wouldn't even understand it. And it's being silly. This is the truth, though. I used to smoke a lot, okay? You get in the car, everybody lights up, and you keep your windows rolled up. Next thing you know, you can't see 2 or 3 feet in front of you. It's all pot, and everybody's just, the music's jamming. Anyway, you kind of wonder if these ancient priests were hotboxing some particular room, or, hey, bring over those bundles of hashish, and they throw it on the altar, and everyone sees the smoke of the Lord. I'm just being silly here.
Well, we do know that other religious traditions in the ancient world did use these drugs. In fact, I think the most beautiful religious hymn is a hymn to Soma in the Rig Veda. And it's just spectacularly beautiful and speaks of being brought into the world of the gods and so on. And we know the Soma was some kind of hallucinogenic that they figured was a divine plant and a god and all that. I mean, we know really that had to do with consumption of Amanita muscaria or something. There are different theories about it. And there's no way to deny that is real spirituality. As you say, I've never had any such experience.
Right.
I go with my dreams and stuff. That's where I have divine encounters. I would like to recommend a book. Also, you mentioned how that different states are brought on if you're in a moment of crisis or something. There is a fascinating book by Jacob Needleman, who is a one-time Gurdjieff disciple. It's called Lost Christianity. And he says, what is it that the ancients had that made such a difference that we don't have in Christianity anymore? And he gives a bunch of vignettes of his travels over the years and how it really hit him once when he was totally exhausted and uncomfortable because of having to climb up this mountain to this monastery and so on. And he said that it was when his guard was down that it hit him. And it's like he had armor on, and we all have a kind of armor to protect us from unusual experiences. And that if it should fall away, we're open to the spirit that is trying to come in, and like a lightning bolt it does. Now I don't know what to make of that, but it's the best treatment of that idea I've ever seen, and shows why a crisis situation may eventuate in a religious experience.
I mean, look, we get it, and now we're getting into this for a second here. I don't mind if you guys have questions, feel free to ask, but it's one of the things that really gets me when I was studying this, trying to understand the brain and people's experiences, is when we're about to die and the brain knows this, it will protect you. I was watching a film where there's guys that are going into the Air Force or some type of jets. They're practicing. I can't remember if it's Mach or if it's like gravity or whatever they're trying to do. They're inside these chambers where they're supposed to like feel the intensity of like Mach 1, Mach 2.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but a lot of them pass out because oxygen doesn't get to the brain. And one guy does, and he's like on camera, like moving and doing stuff, but he literally is unconscious, like he lost consciousness. And he woke up, and the guy's like, "Did you win the fight?" And next thing you know, he's like, "Whoa, where am I?" Like he thought he was fighting someone to defend his life, but really he just passed out because the blood didn't get to his brain. And his brain, I think, is trying to protect him. I think the same thing happens with people when they're dying. They see the light at the end of the tunnel is probably that the lights are the eyes are starting to shut down. So the visuals are, the light is at the end. It's getting dark here close to us, but it's far away. And you can close your eyes in a complete black room. I was talking to a scientist recently about this, and just push on your eyeball, close your eyes, complete black room, push on your eyeball, you'll see light. There's no light in the room, but your eyes produce that fractal of light. Just by putting the pressure there, you'll see it in your head. Well, when we're about to die, or we think we're about to die, you're releasing a rush of chemicals, potentially things like dimethyltryptamine or hallucinogenic potential chemicals that are already naturally produced in the brain. And these experiences, they're not to be taken lightly. I'm not saying that they're not real experiences. This is what I had last night in our Heretics Anonymous conversation, but I'm saying they're natural. They're not like God came down out of heaven. Now they might go, well, prove that. And I'll say, well, I can't prove that, but I can show you everyone has these experiences. Your biggest atheists in the world have experiences like this, but they can also say, well, I think the cause of it is a natural cause. It wasn't Yahweh. It wasn't Bel. It wasn't Buddha. It wasn't Krishna. It wasn't Muhammad or Allah. It wasn't. And these are all common things we all experience. And so that's what I've been trying to say all along, even though I think it's like, I know how it is as a Christian apologist to kind of combat what I'm saying here, I'm rationalizing everything. But to me, that makes more sense. It answers every religious view as to why everyone has experiences and things like that. That's just my opinion, Dr. Price. So,
well, yeah, if you're going to have a religious experience from God, how's he going to give it to you? The brain works in a certain way. It's like if God wants to speak audibly, it's got to come through whatever brain function that makes you hear things or think you do. What else could it be? You're gonna. People seem to think of, they talk about Satori or the Vajra in Buddhism, the lightning bolt of enlightenment. Yeah, I think naturally of comic book superheroes. How about Captain Marvel here? he says Shazam, and the magic lightning strikes, turning Billy Batson into the omnipotent Captain Marvel. It's discontinuous. It's nothing natural. It's not just lightning, but the magic lightning. I used to write about the Shazam model of sanctification, that people seem to think that that's what's going to happen. Utterly discontinuous intervention. If that happened, how could you receive it? It has to come through a natural means.
Even with Paul, I want to get to these super chats because people are, Paul, he saw it and heard it. They couldn't see it, but they could hear it. But then they could see it, but they couldn't hear it later. The accounts aren't even, they seem to be flipped. But yeah, this is the same problem we kept coming down to yesterday is, oh, well, I agree that it all comes through the natural, Derek. You're limiting it to only that. And I know these experiences will seem like that can't be natural. That was just too much. But if you've ever had a dream, you can have those wild, unbelievable experiences just dreaming. And there's science that backs up what's happening in the dream within the brain. Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat. Any opinion on the book, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop?
I'm vaguely familiar with that book and have been for years. I just don't know. I have the impression the guy was some kind of crank, but that's unfair. I've not read the book, but I think he gets into Jack Chick territory with thinking he knows things about Nimrod and Semiramis in the ancient world, and that all the stuff about creating the one world religion of the Antichrist and so on. So it strikes me as inadvertent apocalyptic fiction. But this is just the impression I got from I'm not sure where. I may be totally wrong about it. I'll have to take a look at it.
Thank you, Constellation. Always coming through, man. Thanks a lot. Another one by Pet Mark. Thank you for the super chat. Matthew 22:25. Are Sadducees referring to Mary and are alluding to the illegitimacy of Jesus' birth? The 7 brothers would be 7 children originally. Dr. Price, are you acquainted with this particular passage? Can I pull this up?
Yeah, I can. Matthew
22:25. I'll read it out loud in my ESV I have. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. To marry and are alluding to the illegitimacy of Jesus' birth? ? So he's asking, is this? I didn't see this. Hold on, let me see. Verse 24 saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brothers must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. I don't think this has anything to do with the illegitimacy of the birth of Jesus, if I'm not mistaken.
No, this is a good example of a kind of polemical hypothetical that the rabbis used to give. If anything, this sort of sounds like the book of Tobit, where this woman is engaged in turn to 7 guys, I think, and this demon Asmodeus has a fixation on her and kills the husbands one by one, and so forth. And they're trying to get Jesus to say there is no resurrection because if at the resurrection she were to be the wife of all 7 men at the same time, polyandry, which exists in some cultures, but not in Judaism. He's saying that that's what would happen, wouldn't it, in this resurrection you guys believe in? Because it does preface it by saying the same day Sadducees came to him who say there is no resurrection. So they're trying to get him into a corner saying this could happen, right? And what would the deal be? Would there be male harem for this woman in the resurrection? And Jesus slides out of it by saying, well, nobody's going to be married anymore.
Is this a hint at Paul, maybe, like saying, like, stop, don't get married anymore anyways? Do you think it might play a role into that?
Well, Luke's version does sound like that, because he adds, as to the resurrection, those deemed worthy of it will be like the angels in heaven, neither marrying nor giving in marriage. That does sound like, given the impending crisis, it's better not to marry in 1 Corinthians 7, but I just don't think that has anything to do with that. In fact, I also don't think that the business about is this not the son of Mary? Matthew has it too, but I can find it more easily in I think it's Mark 6. Yeah, he went away from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get all this? What is the wisdom given to him? What mighty works are wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon, and are not his sisters here with us? You know, this is the guy, right? This was the guy we knew some years ago. And they took offense and so forth. Well, some say, son of Mary? Why not son of Joseph? Isn't that a way of saying, I don't know who the guy's father is? And that just seems grossly incompatible with the praise they're giving him. Now, the people are insisting on interpreting this in light of the rest of the passage, which is an add-on. As Bultmann pointed out long ago, the reason the brakes are slammed on here like this, and they took offense at him, you wouldn't get that impression from what you just read. Right. But what does Jesus go on to say? A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. And he could do no mighty works there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Bultmann said this proverb survives in the Gospel of Thomas with no context. And it seems pretty clear that Mark heard that floating proverb, and also had this story, local boy makes good, and figured, well, geez, he is among his own kin and his own country, and this is the only story I have where that's true. Why would Jesus say this if he was getting praise there? Well, they must have suddenly turned sour. And this is why Luke has Jesus suddenly give these references. Yeah, I know what you're going to say to me. We heard you did miracles in the Capernaum, but why not here? Let's see some healings. And he says, look, remember when Elijah healed the widow of Zarephath? There were lots of people, lepers in Israel. He didn't heal one of them. He healed this Philistine woman and so forth. And he son of a bitch, and decided that he had to die. A lynch mob goes after him. What the heck? Why would Jesus do this? Well, it's not how they missed that little detail here. Well, Luke is trying to make sense of what do you mean they took offense at him? What did he say? It doesn't tell us here. It's just obvious, clumsy redaction. Okay, is this not the son of Mary occurs in the first half. The local boy makes good half. They're not going to be saying, you bastard, if that's what they mean. How this bastard, the fatherless one, get all this wisdom? It's just absurd. The common explanation is that Joseph was dead by this time, which is not unlikely. And or I have a theory that Joses, which is just a nickname for Joseph, has slipped through a scribal goof from the line above it. And it originally said, "Is this not the son of Joses and Mary?" And the others are the pillars, James, John, and Cephas, or Simeon, or Simon Peter. Not.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, I could go into that, but we'd be here for.
Yeah. Susan Bailey, thank you so much. I don't want to mess up your last name. Thank you for the super sticker. Seriously, really appreciate the love. And I appreciate you giving a long response, Dr. Price. But Susan, if you want, email me, Derek@MythVisionPodcast.com. All that stuff's down in the description. I really appreciate the super sticker. Sorry. Feel free to ask any question. If you want to email me, I'll try and get it recorded. I really appreciate the love and the support. Oz, if you don't know who Oz is, please, Oz, do me a favor. Post your YouTube link in the comments so people can go subscribe to you. He's obviously putting together some conference here soon too. But here's his question. Thanks for the super chat too. Is there any good reason to suspect that Paul created Jesus after his Damascus Road experience? Dr. Price.
Well, the Damascus Road experience itself is fictive. It seems to me clearly to be based on the miraculous turnarounds of Heliodorus in 2 Maccabees chapter 3. I mean, they're startling parallels to the story. And that of Pentheus in Euripides the Bacchae, both very well known. Luke would have to have known them. And there is no such story in any Pauline epistle. So I don't think that that even figures into it. But if you mean, did Paul's Jesus originate with him? That's possible. As I was saying before, he could have had a dream or a vision or whatever and combined elements that were quite common in the religions with which he must have been familiar. And that he said, well, this, and after all, what did Marcion say about the father of Jesus being a new, hitherto unknown God? He said that Jesus was trying to introduce this God, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. No one knows the Father except the Son, and any to whom the Son wills to reveal him. That's Marcionite. Right. And Marcion thought that the 12 disciples were such blockheads, they simply could not reckon with the novelty of this, and so tried to somehow figure out how to assimilate this to Judaism. And Jesus is up there in heaven saying, oh my God, well, why did I pick these idiots? Just like in Mark 9, how long do I have to bear with you guys? I mean, so he went to somebody else who was smart enough to get it, and that's why he picked Paul, who had not been one of the 12. Well, so Paul is preaching of a new gospel, a new God, kind of like in Acts 17 at Athens. I saw your idol to an unknown God. Well, that's who I'm preaching to you today. So in that sense, yeah, he might have figured that, okay, Jesus told him about this new God, but in a sense, that kind of amounts to what you're saying here. Was he the preacher of a new God associated with Christ? That's not too far from saying, did he proclaim this new Christ?
Before we get off Oz, and I've got another super chat here, a couple of them that we're going to get to. Dr. Price, Oz is putting together a conference here soon. Oz, hit me up, man. We got to talk about possibly seeing what the possibilities would be about getting Dr. Bob to come and speak as well. Possibly. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But you're going to be on.
This is not the same one Darren Slade is organizing, is it?
I don't know. I'll find out from Oz. Yeah, I'll find out. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. So Scylla says, in the falsified Paul Herman Dettering proposes the idea that Pliny's letters to Trajan might be a medieval forgery. Can Dr. Bob elaborate on this?
Oh, yeah, that's what I think. One of the Tübingen scholars already said this in the 19th century, partly because I think it doesn't appear in earlier manuscripts, I think, of the collection of letters. Pliny wrote those letters for publication. He's the one that edited them because he figured, well, I got a literary flair. I know people want to read what I wrote. And apparently this does not appear in all the manuscripts. And it sounds like a type of apologetics that was going on in the early church, where like Tertullian claimed that if you consult the Acts of Pilate, which must be somewhere, you'll find that Jesus was exonerated. And in fact, one of the Caesars has issued a decree that Christians not be persecuted. What? And there's stuff like that you see, they've found that we're okay. And that's what you have in Pliny's letter. Pliny, the governor of Bithynia, is writing to, Hadrian, one of the emperors, and saying, I don't know why we're persecuting these people. They're as innocent as the day is long. I mean, they meet early in the morning to take a vow to help little old ladies across the street and so on. I mean, there's nothing seditious about this. They just sing a hymn to Christ as to a God. But I am worried because they're against idolatry, and because of that, the meat markets in Bithynia are suffering because nobody's buying sacrificial animals. What? That sounds fishy to me. Both the whitewashing of Christians and the notion that they're having such, and he says he can't even round up many of them, but there's so many, they're destroying the beef economy. It just sounds phony to me, and so I think it's probably not an authentic letter of Pliny.
Thank you. Susan, thank you again for that super sticker earlier. Deconstructing Jesus, she says, by Dr. Price changed my life. That was many years ago. Please read his books. I really appreciate that. That's a
yes, me too. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Eddie says no at Oz. Next question. It's Oz's question to you. It's pretty funny. Let me see. Constellation Pegasus says, big news, JW Watchtower and Awake magazines only one new issue for 2022, 2 reprints. Good to see Watchtower downsizing and hopefully go bankrupt.
I'm seeing more and more things online, testimonies of dropouts, and that's not statistically significant, I realize, but the internet, as Josh McDowell once pointed out, is the big threat to keeping them down on the farm. You know the old song, you're gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris. Well, yeah, he said now these people have access to all this atheist stuff and anti-apologetics. We're losing lots of people from this, and it looks like the witnesses are as well. And I don't mean to gloat over this because, as I've often said, I don't care what anybody believes. It is none of my business. But it is interesting to note that this may be having a real that all these kind of things on the internet may be having a real impact on the witnesses.
I will say this with a caveat. I don't care what people believe ultimately, but when you have organized religions that practice extremely harmful you know, how do I put it, like, you're supposed to separate yourself from your own flesh and blood according to these religions, because if they become apostates, don't talk to them. Like these certain policies, I would love to see the reform take place. You want to believe Santa Claus comes down your chimney every year, once a year, go for it. I'm just saying that to say, I don't care what you believe, right? But when it harms other people and it's causing these issues, or you can't get a blood transfusion because some guy who doesn't know what he's talking about using a book that has zero to do with that. It has nothing to do with a blood transfusion, but they've put this in a policy to make you believe that if you go get a blood transfusion, you're not going to make it through the apocalypse, which is a whole nother headache. They're teaching a soon apocalypse. You know, when you have those things, I'm anti that. And I must admit, Dr. Bob, you're not as confrontational about those things, and I respect that because you study. For me, I am big against that. I am like, I want to see a change like that. I want people to believe.
I don't see those things as integral to being a Jehovah's Witness. I don't know why they stick with a blood transfusion. I do understand, though I think it's tragic. But the other stuff, the shunning and all that, I don't see why that follows from being a Jehovah's Witness or any other group.
It's what they enforce, though. It's what they, as a group and a community, I'd like to see them change these policies.
Yeah.
Like I said about Scientology, you know, you want to keep on believing L. Ron Hubbard created electromagnetic pulsing devices that can read your senses and know your innermost secrets. Go for it. But as soon as you go around, you know, causing like your struggling drug addict child who really needs to be rehabilitated by a medical professional from drug addiction, and they possibly need some type of substance that can help them make it through, and you're saying, no, he's under our care, and you're locking him in a room to withdraw off of fentanyl. Okay, we've got problems here, and that's a whole nother rabbit trail. So anyways, I agree, and hopefully I see more changes take place too.
On the one thing about the blood transfusions, the reason they do that, as I understand it, forbid them, is that they say, well, Leviticus says you cannot drink blood, and this is basically intravenous feeding.
Right.
Well, that's the kind of rabbinical casuistry you find in the Mishnah and all that. So I understand that, but are you going to give that more weight than these stories in the Gospels about Jesus healing people on the Sabbath, even if he's not supposed to?
Right.
I mean, you know, which among you would not get his poor little lamb out of a ditch if it fell in, even though it's the Sabbath? It says, learn that what this means. I desire mercy and not a sacrifice. Well, why don't you take that at least as seriously as
blood transfusion? You just survive. I'd rather see you live than die. Get the blood transfusion. We can look past this one. At least do that. Shoot, it gets old, man. I really appreciate you commenting on that. And thank you, Constellation. Daniel Navarro, thank you for the super chat. Mr. Price, have you heard of any theory of an early Paul, something of a Paul in the times of the Maccabean revolt? Thanks to both of you for your incredible work. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Well, there's the same question essentially as before, and I have barely heard of the theory. I'll have to, I believe you're going to kindly send me some information about it. And
I'm going to have to. Daniel, if you have anything on this or someone's saying something like this, I'm personally highly skeptical, right? But I will investigate and look and see what they're saying and why. Send me an email, Derek@MythVisionPodcast.com or MythVisionPodcast@gmail.com. It's in the description of all my videos where all my links are. Send me what you find on this. But someone else brought this up earlier, if you weren't watching the live, Daniel, where they thought Jesus might have, or versions of Christianity, which are probably based on Jesus, predate the first century, possibly first century BC. You know, I don't think they mentioned the second century BC, but it's an interesting thing to investigate because we do have that interesting statement in the, is it the Mishnah? It talks about under Alexander Jannaeus or something to that. So yeah, there's stuff to look at and say, is this something going on here? But yeah, thank you for the super chat. Yeah, email me, please. Constellation Pegasus is coming back for more. One last time, reading Child Sacrifice in Ancient Israel by Heath D. Durrell, taking lots of notes, opinions on this book. Have you read that book, Dr. Price?
Not heard of it, but I do think it's pretty clear there was human infant sacrifice in ancient Israel. You have it stated pretty clearly in Exodus when it says in the so-called Book of the Covenant section, chapter 22 or thereabouts, it said, the firstborn of your flocks you shall give to Yahweh on the 8th day from its birth. And it says, the firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. And that seems to mean and sacrifice for the same it does as it does with the animals. But in chapter 13, which occurs earlier given the present setup of the book, but appears to be a later layer from the priestly code or something, there it says the same thing, but the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem with an ox or an ass. And so they're moving away from it, but that implies that they've amended it. You don't have to do this anymore. The Abraham story, though there are many dimensions of it, the idea is that apparently that Abraham, as the great father of Judaism, he is depicted as doing what all Jewish fathers would have been doing, slaying their firstborn. He's about to, but then the angel says, no, that's okay. I just wanted to see how faithful you were. Here, you see that ram in the thicket trapped with its horns? You can sacrifice that instead. And so Isaac gets off. Okay, that seems to be a precedent, and what do you call it? Like
a fossil. A fossil. Let's put it that way. A fossil.
Yeah, it's a ceremonial myth where this is what you would read to tell people, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. That was changed.
Right.
And just like the thing with Moses, when he's on his way to Egypt to do what God told him to do, but God jumps out of the bushes and tries to kill him, and apparently steamed that Abe wasn't circumcised, Moses wasn't circumcised when he married Zipporah, and she cuts off the foreskin of Gershom, their infant son, touches that to Moses' penis and says, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. What the heck? Well, actually, that makes sense too, because that was a ceremonial precedent to legitimate infant circumcision in place of bridegroom circumcision. That was another custom they didn't like. Changed. So that's how to read these stories. And so we have the same thing with infant sacrifice. And the weirdest case of this is in Ezekiel, where God says to Ezekiel that to get back at his disobedient people, he gave them laws that were perverse, that one could not live by. And one of these was infant sacrifice. Is I wanted to horrify them as a wake-up call. I mean, you don't say something like that unless you're really in the corner. Yeah. But you can't deny that God had the law commanded infant sacrifice. So there are all these attempts to get around it or out of it, and that's what's going on there. So yeah, it was. Or how about all these things about passing your children through the fire? What the heck? You're sacrificing them to Molech, the fire god that lives in Tophet or Gehenna, same place at the bottom of Mount Zion. So they did that, but they stopped it.
Obviously, they were saying no to that, but there are what Dr. John J. Collins says, fossils. And here, just to give people a little teaser, this goes to show you, I interviewed him in his office. I'm not actually going to play it, but I ask him questions and he's responding and he goes into the fossils and stuff. Tons of these videos, ladies and gentlemen. So be sure to join the Patreon because you'll get access to every video that I'm about to edit. I've got 54 videos between Elaine Pagels, John J. Collins, and Joel Baden. All are going to be released early on Patreon. So if you're a Patreon member, you'll have access to every single one of them as soon as I have them done. And then they'll slowly trickle like a blood transfusion onto YouTube. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, thank you,
Yeah,
Constipation. Oh, go
when
ahead.
you watch those, it will rapidly become clear what a fraudulent quack I am compared to these guys.
I really appreciate that love. And let's see. Christopher Malloy says, does Dr. Bob know any other tunes from our gang, the Little Rascals, that he might care to serenade us with?
Was one of those something I sang a moment ago from our gang of Little Rascals?
Christopher must think so.
Gee, now that's all I remember. A couple of fragments from the show, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. Write me, Christopher. You know, you're on the Patreon too, I believe. Just message me. Let me know what it was he's saying, if you remember. And
Oh, well, there is something relevant to this. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of the Mickey Mouse Club, because I wonder how many people are aware that you can sing Amazing Grace to the tune of the Mickey Mouse Club theme. AMAZINGRACE.
Okay.
Amazing Grace.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they're talking about Paul anymore. So, I am going to say good night to these people. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Dr. Price. Thank you, MythVision podcast. MythVision podcast is the YouTube channel that you will find the original of this one. I noticed that I'm getting quite a lag in my feedback. I don't know how current you guys are. But the question remains, based on this, let's see if we can come to some kind of a conclusion from what we heard. I think that I can conclude from what I heard. I conclude that the Jesus Christ that Paul alludes to did not exist. The Jesus Christ that is represented in the Gospels did not exist. I think Paul, if Paul's vision is all Christianity has to hold on to refer to point to as being inerrant, if that's all they have, then they have nothing. Derek Lambert and Dr. Robert Price have shown me today in this broadcast that Christianity is just it's made up. We watched together, you and I don't know if you joined me, but we watched, and it'll be back in the back catalog, the Flavians, through in the Roman Empire, the Flavian dynasty. We watched that. Now, the Flavians were pretty much in charge throughout the first century, during the time of this alleged Jesus story. And there is the documentary that we watched showed that the whole Jesus cult, the whole Jesus movement was contrived by the Flavians. And I encourage you to research that further, and I will bring up some more Flavian history, because it's very relevant. You can take whatever is written about the Flavians. You can be sure that there is merit to it. Anything written about Jesus is specious. There's no backing. A vision that Paul had is very dubious at best. The fact that Paul lived during exactly the same time as he was born, roughly within a year of alleged Jesus himself, yet did not meet or take note and listen to these teachings. It's not convinced me at all that Jesus actually existed. To me, I'm convinced more than ever now, and I hope you are too, that Jesus is just a mythical character. Christianity is a hoax. Every single one of you that are caught up in this Jesus cult are being scammed. So just drop it, okay? Stop it. Just get back into reality and let's just stop it. Let's talk about things that really matter, okay? What I would like to do, and this is almost an announcement. In fact, it is an announcement. I am very concerned about women's rights. And I'm very disappointed in women. I just want to say that. The Taliban in Afghanistan have reduced women to property. The Taliban in Afghanistan have decreed that women will have all the rights that are set out for them in Sharia law, Islamic law. And I'm very disappointed in women right across the globe who haven't said a damn word. There's no leadership, there's no female leadership, there's no women, female, or even any outcry other than from me about what's happening to the women in Afghanistan. Perhaps the same thing could be said about the women in Pakistan and Iran. Maybe other places, I don't know, but definitely in Afghanistan, women are valueless. And in Afghanistan, to the Taliban, where is the outcry? I really would like to focus on this going forward, not necessarily on a platform just like this and ranting, but I would like to do this in a discussion forum. That's coming up. But for now, I don't think that Jesus Christ ever existed. Jesus Christ is as mythical a figure now as he ever was since he was dreamed up by the Flavians. We'll get into that at some point, I promise. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being with me through these couple of hours, coming up to 2 hours and 40 minutes. Stay reasonable and just drop the stories. Contact theclergyproject.org if you need help getting away from the cults. you.